Welcome to the summary of the fourth in our Cadmium Talk series. I'm Althea Mackenzie. Ladies and gentlemen, we've had 4 outstanding and informative presentations in the series thus far. And we're happy to bring you now a synopsis of Webinar 4, which was held on Tuesday, January 30, 2024. This project has been implemented and is managed by the Inter-American Institute for Cooperation on Agriculture ICA in collaboration with the International Cocoa Organization ICCO, with funding from the Standards and Trade Development Facility and the 11th European Development Fund. The project is aptly named Improving Capacity Building and Knowledge Sharing to support the management of cadmium levels in cocoa in Latin America and the Caribbean for export to the European region. Now, the purpose of this webinar series is to improve understanding on the topic of cadmium in cocoa, sharing what's known, identifying what's still under research, and answering questions as far as possible. In Talk 1 of the first webinar on September 26, 2023, Leslie Hufang of iSense shared that cadmium is a naturally occurring heavy metal that has detrimental effects on human health when consumed at unsafe levels. Food safety regulations have been implemented to minimize the levels of cadmium in our food chain, which includes chocolate and cocoa products. In Talk 2 of that webinar, Daniel Guarin, a PhD candidate from Penn State University, showed different pathways by which cadmium can get on the farm, with human activities being the main contributor to cadmium contamination. Some of these pathways included activities outside of the farm, such as mining, or application of pesticides and fertilizers to crops adjacent to or upwind of the cocoa farm. Application of inorganic fertilizers or manure containing high levels of cadmium was also a surefire way to bring cadmium to cocoa plants. We also learned that acidic soils, pH 5 and under, also made cadmium in the soil more available for the cocoa tree to uptake. In Webinar 2 on October 31, Kevin Carrillo and Luis Solano of INTA Costa Rica explained how cadmium gets from the soil into the cocoa beans and why this is important to the manufacturing of chocolate and how it affects the ability of farmers to sell their cocoa beans. In Talk 2 of Webinar 2, Christina Rotius of Rausch and Mark Young-Shear of Cargill, 2 family-owned generational chocolate companies, shared how laboratory testing for cadmium is critical in monitoring and minimizing its levels from production of the cocoa crop to the manufacturing of chocolate. We also learned that the regulations for cadmium levels must be strictly adhered to by processors of cocoa beans and chocolate manufacturers, and as such affect their sourcing and purchasing decisions for cocoa beans and other raw materials. In Webinar 3, Yassa D. Carrel of Leuven University in Belgium focused on quality assurance of lab testing services for measuring cadmium. That is, how to know if the results you get back from a laboratory for your samples can be trusted. Our interest was piqued with information about the Emax machine, which gives more accurate testing for cadmium levels in cocoa. The work of AgroSavia and their testing capabilities and protocols were highlighted by Ruth Quiroga and Daisy Tolosa, who masterfully guided us through the process of how to collect your soil and cocoa tissue samples for cadmium testing so you can know with confidence the levels of cadmium on your farm and in the cocoa beans you produce. Now that we've shared information on webinars 1 to 3 in the Cadmium Talk series, it's time for us to focus on number 4. Dr. Gideon Ramtahal shares information on managing cadmium levels in cocoa at the pre-harvest phase, and Dr. Frank Intriago shares information on mitigating strategies during the cocoa fermentation process. Let's now dive into the first of these presentations. This one from Dr. Gideon Ramtahal, research scientist Cocoa Research Center, the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine, Trinidad and Tobago. Dr. Ramtahal is a highly motivated research scientist who holds a PhD in analytical chemistry, and with more than 15 years' experience, he has devoted his career to improving agricultural and environmental quality with a specific focus on addressing food contamination. Dr. Ramtahal first focuses on how cadmium gets into cocoa beans and the factors that contribute to the uptake.
It happens at the cultivation phase. So this is the main place where cadmium gets into the cocoa bean. It is localized in the soil as well as in the tree. So cadmium is taken up through the roots from the soil and eventually gets up into the tree, which is then moved into the cocoa beans, the thing that we love to enjoy, the thing that we love to use to make our wonderful chocolate and cocoa products. Now, this is the route by which cadmium occurs. So therefore, we need to understand what are the factors that are contributing to cadmium uptake into the tree. Now, we're aware the soil plays a part as well as the tree. So let's talk soil. Now, soil, you have what we call natural cadmium levels in the soil. It could be due to volcanic origin, it could be due to your organic material that may be, of course, decomposing if they are in fact high or rich in cadmium. You also have what we call anthropogenic, which is a fancy term for saying due to pollution. This is more or less sources of cadmium that may occur in fertilizers or polluted river sources, as Liz would have mentioned at the beginning, Dr. Johnson, sorry. So you also have physical chemical properties. So what does this mean? It means that there are certain characteristics in the soil that may contribute to increased cadmium uptake into the cocoa plant. These were mentioned before, but just for reiteration's sake, because these mitigation strategies that I will be discussing is specific to a number of these characteristics or properties. So in some cases, the pH of your soil may be acidic. And this has been shown by a number of different publications in different countries to contribute to cadmium uptake. Essentially, what occurs if your soil is acidic in your farm, it makes the cadmium more available. If your organic matter level in your soil is low, it makes the cadmium more available. In addition, you have other metals that are competitive with cadmium for uptake in the cocoa farm. What does this mean? It means that the cocoa tree needs certain nutrients, of course, to increase in productivity. And some of these nutrients, such as manganese, that Mn, iron, or zinc, may compete with cadmium or may be mistaken for cadmium if they are in fact low in the soil. And thus you will have an increased accumulation of cadmium into the cocoa plant. There are other characteristics, including salinity of the soil texture, whether it's too sandy or if it's not sufficiently clay to really trap the cadmium in the soil. Now, all of these are soil factors, and all of these may contribute to cadmium uptake in your farm. Another factor, as mentioned earlier, is the genetic factor, the tree itself. Studies done by Lewis et al. Would have shown that there is variability in different varieties in cocoa. This study was done at our International Cocoa Gene Bank in Trinidad and Tobago. And thus, even though these varieties aren't commercial, research has also shown that there are certain commercial varieties that may also allow for increased cadmium uptake.
Now that we understand how cadmium gets into the cocoa beans, it is time for us to learn how to manage the cadmium issue at the cultivation phase. Here is Dr. Ramtahal using what he calls the cadmium decision tree to quite effectively explain how to manage the issues using an evidence-based approach.
So let's see, how could we decide, or what type of decision can we take to manage cadmium based on the evidence we find in your farm? So as you can see in this particular decision-making tree, as we like to put it, these are some of the different things that you can implement to manage based on the different factors that may exist. So let's say, for example, The first one, control your soil cadmium input. It will be wise to get a clear idea of whether or not first your farm does in fact have cadmium. How do we do this? You need to, of course, determine the soil cadmium levels, also the bean cadmium levels. Certainly, within your country, you need to identify what would be the recommended laboratory to do so. There are different types of equipment and analyses, and this also includes the EMAX. I think you probably would have heard this being mentioned earlier. It's a new instrument that provides our facilities a much quicker and has been shown to be accurate as well. Now, just to give you an overview of this, it is important if you are starting off a farm for the first time to grow cocoa to understand whether or not you have a cadmium issue. So determining the soil concentration before you plant your cocoa trees will be wise. Therefore, you can go about ensuring that your field or your cocoa beans are free from cadmium. Let's go back to the tree. That's one we covered. Let's go into two. This deals with soil fixation and availability. And three also deals with competitive trace metal ion blocking. Now, these might sound like fancy terms, but we covered them earlier when we discussed the physical chemical properties. As I mentioned earlier, these are characteristics that exist in the soil that may enable increased cadmium uptake. So, for example, you have acidic pH, like I said, it makes the cadmium more available in the soil, and therefore the cocoa plant will take it up more. If your soil is deficient in organic matter, again, cadmium will be taken up more. If your soils are deficient in manganese and zinc, there's a possibility that your plant will take up again cadmium on a higher level. Now, this mitigation strategy is specific to the acidity of your soil. And by this particular slide, you can see that it's about lime application, correct soil acidity to reduce cadmium uptake. Now, this is one method whereby you can try to neutralize the acidity, which will immobilize the cadmium and prevent, or I wouldn't say prevent, but minimize cadmium uptake into the plant and hopefully into the beans. Then we have organic matter. So let's say your soil is deficient in organic matter. Now you can apply an organic material. This is a particular organic material that has been used to increase organic matter in the soil and has been quite efficient in also trapping the cadmium in the soil. Biochar. What is biochar? It's basically a particular type of charcoal that has an added ability to trap metals. So it replaces the deficiency of organic matter in the soil, but it also has an added ability to trap hold on to metals. And therefore it will minimize uptake into the cocoa plant. We also have alternative organic materials, because if you aren't aware, biochar is expensive because it has to go through a chemical process to actually make that material more attractive, to trap on or hold on to cadmium. So now you have looking at alternative materials that could be utilized as well. And these are alternative organic materials. And they are much more readily available in different countries. It really depends on your country and what you have available to be used. So you have spent grain, you have coffee hulls, cookweed that we would have utilized to realize their effects. What you're probably wondering, what is spent grain is? Basically, the waste from when you're creating beer, right? Those barley, etc. So they kind of dispose of that, but it's organic matter, it's organic rich, and also has the ability, like biochar, to also trap metal. You have another particular area if your farm is low in manganese and zinc. Like I said, manganese and zinc, there are other metals in the soil and they have a competitive relationship with cadmium. It's almost like they fight with each other. 1 minute, if manganese and zinc low in the soil, cadmium gets real happy. Cadmium is going to get up into that plant, happy, happy, happy. But if you are able to ensure that your soil or plant has sufficient manganese and zinc, you can actually minimize cadmium uptake. Now, this is where we have to have a little bit of talk now about these mitigation strategies. Probably saying, well, we have nothing to worry about, but you have to consider the availability of these materials. Yes, you may have an acidic problem in your farm, and you might want to buy lime, but is it available? Is it cost effective? Is it cadmium free? Do you have available labor to apply this amendment? Is your terrain going to be easy to work with? I know some of you all were thinking when we were doing, look, when I was presenting on the lime and biochar, why is he disrupting the cedar roots in the soil? So you have to consider all of these things. So in other words, these are challenges to a number of these mitigation strategies. You also have to consider that it's not a one-time fix. The cost, the labor, we barely even have labor in some countries. I know in Trinidad and Tobago, we barely have labor to even grow our own cocoa. So far less for getting people to actually do this type of work to mitigate hazard. You incorporating plants that have the ability to fight to accumulate cadmium from the soil. So what does this mean? You have soil plants that have this added ability to pick up cadmium. So if you could plant or put these plants within the cocoa farm, you could get them to remove the cadmium from the soil and then remove them.
Dr. Ramtahal also notes that despite important information being already available on the genetic markers of cocoa varieties, they're still years away from being able to say definitively what varieties are less susceptible to cadmium uptake.
When you look at varieties, it's going to take a number of years to actually go get a breeding program to develop varieties that, in fact, can be used commercially as low accumulators. Because ideally, that is what we want. So it's not a quick fix. We are still in the initial phases. I know some of you all probably heard the term CRISPR, Cas9, etc. They could utilize all of those types of technology, which can modify the plant itself to ensure that it doesn't pick up cadmium. But we are still years ahead, more than 15, 20 years. We're not even sure how long a breeding program would be for us to identify these type of low or high accumulators that could be utilized commercially.
Dr. Ramtahal closes his presentation by highlighting the fact that the attendant cost to put in place a plan to reduce cadmium levels on a cocoa farm can be expensive.
If you do have a cadmium issue, what is causing the cadmium uptake in your farm? This is where you need to really look at your soil physical chemical properties. These characteristics will enable you to really pinpoint your issue, and it's very farm specific, so it's not a one fix all issue. So many of these recommendation strategies that I just went through, as you would realize, are very long term and they're expensive. It really depends on the availability of the material in your country. You know, we need proper incentives, we need the right labor. So, you know, it's not as encouraging immediate, at first sight or first listen in this case. So what I could recommend and what I believe my colleague is going to speak about next is the post-harvest approach, which is something called blending. I know you all are quite familiar. Being able to blend might be a short-term solution. I know some of you are probably thinking, no, my farm is only fine flavor cocoa and it may be used in only like dark chocolates, etc. Well, that might be an issue for some of you because you may lose your flavor characteristics. But those who can, and you're able to identify where you have low cadmium and high cadmium, you can combine it and to ensure that your beans would be safe for export.
Now, having gone through the various ways one can try to reduce cadmium levels in the pre-harvest stage, it is now time for us to highlight Presentation 2, which focuses on reducing cadmium levels during the fermentation process. The presenter is Frank Intriago Flor. He holds a doctorate in agrarian sciences, specializing in methods of extraction, fractionation, and quantification of heavy metals. He holds a master's in international agribusiness from the International University of Ecuador and a degree in agricultural engineering from the Earth University in Costa Rica. Currently, Dr. Intriago Flor is a full-time professor at the Technical University of Manabi, Ecuador. He opens his presentation with a focus on the different phases in the post-harvest process. Please note that his presentation is in Spanish, and so we will hear the voice of the interpreter.
The beneficiary of cocoa begins from harvest. We may say that it is important to collect healthy fruits without the mature fruits. Basically, we can harvest till they are mature without diseases, free from diseases, and not overripe or green. After that, we do the pulp and we make a transverse or longitudinal cut to the pod. The beans are then extracted. The pulp bean are placed in sterile containers or bins, and they are taken to the collection center and the place where we have the possibilities for the fermentation process.
Frank notes that the fermentation phase is very important.
We have the fermentation phase, which is a very important phase. There are a series of conditions to optimize the qualities of the cocoa bean in its further potential use. So here, this is where we add all this plus the aroma, the flavor, and we improve the quality. So there are three phases. There is the alcoholic stage, the acidic one, and the oxidative phase. Normally, this is done. This takes 3 to 5 days in the fermentation phase with the cocoa beans. In this phase, this fermentation phase, it is important to measure the pH, the Rex grades that they start with, and those are as they progress. There is a high consumption of sugar and that are there or that have been multiplied in the place or in the fermentation method. We use temperature, important. We check temperature during the fermentation phase. This is very important in order to get the optimal fermentation during the mass fermentation. The removal, very important. Why do we need to remove this? Maybe during the first 24 hours we don't need it, but later the fermentation requires removals to control temperature. So moving from temperatures over 50 degrees centigrades.
Dr. Intriago Flores says the use of efficient microorganisms is also critical.
The work we are being carried out includes the use of efficient organisms, and we have work with lactobacillus. What causes the microorganisms? Nowadays, they are used for production of organic manure. They have a beneficial effect for the production of food, particularly when we are doing something agrochemicals free. It is also used to manage liquid and solid waste, wastewater treatments.
Here once again is Dr. Intriago Flor highlighting results of some studies undertaken during the fermentation phase.
What is this liquid that runs out when the bean is taken out from the pot and it is taken to fermentation? So this liquid is known as mucilage. In many cases, it's quite sweet and rich in carbohydrates. We may use it for food. You can see the values of the mucilage we have: cadmium 0.89 and lead 0.38. Then the fermented mass, we did the same analysis: 0.73 for cadmium and 0.37 for lead. The dried almond or bean is in the drying phase where we end this process. We had 0.95 milligrams per kilogram of cadmium and 0.60 milligrams per kilogram of lead. This is what we obtained in these results in this first study. We have worked with efficient microorganisms. We could do something else more related to this fermentation mass, and we consider to assess the cadmium content at two maturity states of cocoa induced with microbial blends during the organic and conventional fermentation in a conventional farm and in an organic farm. Though this is the work implemented two maturity status, the seasoning status and the mature status. So the seasoning group on a scale is the one that is on grade 3, is when the fruit is having a yellowish pigmentation in the pot. And the mature status is when it is mature yellow, according to the variety of cocoa we have, because they have a number of conditions, different pods. If we use a native cocoa, as we know it here, so we have 0% in the seasoning phase, and the levels were 0%, 10%, and 30% for organic and conventional farms. We use Bacillus acidosus, and all this in the list, Rhizobium japonicum, Lactobacillus casei, and all this. How much do we use? We have microfermentators for our task in lab. They have a capacity of 2 kilograms of fermentation mass. If we apply 0.10%, we will have an application of 200 mLs of this microbial consortium directly to the fermentation mass of cocoa. So these are the analysis of the bacteria, the yeast and CFUs that we use, and we use this for cadmium reduction. The fermentation phase with some fermentators, we apply our design and we add a microbial blend. In this fermentation phase, the first day we made an alcoholic fermentation. We add bags. So we the 2 kilograms and the microbial process, and we started controlling temperature, pH, and others for 5 days. In 5 days, we implement this task. The first day is anaerobic fermentation. It means that it is alcoholic fermentation. So to simulate this, we put plastic bags. The second day, the plastic bag grew up, and we took this and we left it for 4 days to continue the fermentation process till 5 days. After that, we have the drying, so particularly temperature. Something very important to get a good fermentation, we need to control the temperature in the fermentation. No question about that. We can, if we can empower this quality, is very important. So you can see here the seasoning and mature states, the microbial consortium, and you can see the farms, organic and conventional ones. We started on the day 0 with normal temperature. So the temperature of the place where we implemented the fermentation, and on the day 4, the fermentation, as we increase the microbial consortium, we will have temperatures below 50 degrees, but temperatures that give us the assurance that we will have a good fermentation. Same thing for the organic and conventional farms, as well as for seasoning and mature conditions. After that, we check the bean quality, and we saw how many beans were fermented, how many have, and which ones we have different conditions. So, and as summary of this result, we see that as we increase the concentration of the microbial consortium in organic and conventional farms, as well as in this case with seasons, we saw that we had a good level of fermented beans. We consider that this test, the physical part of the bean is important, but also the organoleptic part is important as well as such. Here we saw the mature parts, so they have the same behavior using 30% of the microbial consortium in organic and conventional farms. The cadmium reduction. So we start from the controls with new application. So at the beginning, we have 1.3 milligrams, kilograms of cadmium, 1,337 milligrams per kilogram of cadmium. And the treatments for season pots we had for organic and conventional farms that there were considered reduction.
So here we have the thing that mature pods from the organic farm plus application of the 30% microbial blends obtained better results in the physical and mechanical variables. Significant activity in physical variables were observed after application of the microbial blends, and this helps us see that by using microorganisms in fermentation helps increase the degree of fermentation in cocoa beans. This is an alternative that helps us potential our fermentation. The use of 30% of the microbial blend during the fermentation of beans on the organic farms with mature pods resulted in a 27% reduction in cadmium. And this is something considerable in this study.
A very intriguing aspect of Dr. Intriago Flore's presentation is the comparison of results of tests done on farms focusing on conventional farming methods versus farms that use organic farming methods.
They were to evaluate the use of efficient microorganisms, microbial blending, two types of fruit extracts on the reduction of cadmium on the fermented mass and cocoa beans. So for this study, we used cocoa pods from two provinces, Esmeralda and Manabí. And this, in certain places, the level of cadmium may be very high. In the grain and in the soil, we use also banana extract and apple extracts. And we use the two microorganisms, Agropatch, which is Albiobach, which is sold commercially in Ecuador, and EM1, which is an efficient microorganism of the with a Japanese from a Japanese company. And so we did our combinations of the treatments for the microbial blend, for also the fruit extracts and the place of the province. We did the same flow chart, the same analysis as in the previous study. And here you can see the importance of knowing what is what each of our microorganisms have. And here we can see that this is a product that is produced in the province of Rios and the conditions and the products. And EM1, which is authorized by EMRO. EMRO is the company that has a patent worldwide that produces it and is authorized for its manufacturing in MBO EXA in Guayaquil, Ecuador. Very well. I apologize for the coughing. Okay, so moving on, we have the testing for Manabi and Esmeraldas. So to understand this graph better of cadmium emission, E emeralds, M Manabi, B is banana, M is apple. A is albubatch, EM1 is the effectiveness microorganisms. Okay, so in Manabí, we see an initial change of 1.22. In Esmeraldas, we see an initial change of 1.35 in the coffee grain, cocoa grain, sorry. And so we did the treatments. This is emeralds, banana, algae batch, Manabí, banana, algae batch, Esmerald, Manabí, algae batch, or apple, banana, Manu batch, and here is the other one. So you can see what we did with the algae batch, and this is the ones we used with emerald, banana, M1, and Manabí, banana, emerald, M1, and so on and so forth. So if we take a look at these outcomes, the microbial blend did not show any significant differences, but the reduction of cadmium was more considerable in when using. We had done a study without using the fruit extracts, and once we use the fruit extracts, we potentialize somehow the reduction of the effective microorganisms in fermentation. So how do we use the banana? The banana was studied. We had a batch of banana to make sure that it didn't have any heavy metals, and same with the apples. And the microorganisms, we also carried out a number of analysis to make sure there were no heavy metals, obviously, particularly cadmium. And we did the study in this case, getting this M1 outcomes with the banana extract, apple extract of a 61% reduction. That's considerable. And then Albumin batch, also with the apple extract had an interesting, a considerable reduction. If we were to look at the more considerable reductions, we have in the use of EM1 using both banana and apple extracts. So this gives us some light, sheds some light, as I was saying before, as my colleague uh, who spoke prior to me said, this gives us some ideas of how to use short-term strategies for the mitigation of cadmium in cocoa. So we think, to summarize, that using efficient microorganism 20% for 100 ml and apple extract at 3% is a viable alternative for the mitigation of cadmium in cocoa beans.
Dr. Intriago closes out his presentation by highlighting some of the costs of the testing process using the products Albiobact and EM1.
So this is the Albiobatch these are Albiobatch characteristics. This is for remediation, improve soil characteristics, and since it's certified, we decided to use it in the fermentation of cocoa. Cost. The cost that we applied 20 liters of Albio batch, 20 liters is $185. So it normally is sold in 20-liter barrels, and we use 4 liters per quintal. So the cost is $37, sorry, of Albio batch. EM1, which is efficient microorganisms, is produced in Japan by EMRO, and then it's sold here in Ecuador by Embioexa. The EM1 has been used for a while now, and obviously it has a lower cost. And we can see that 1 gallon of EM, as you saw the bottle before, the gallon, with shipping costs, it comes to my lab for $27. So I use 1 liter because I have to activate it. So it is activated with water and molasses. So let's say I have to buy a 20-liter bottle. So 1 container costs $5. The water, molasses 0.72, the water 18 liters 1 cent. In this case, it has to be non-drinking water. That's the success of this activation of the EM. So EM, molasses, water, and you can see there the quantities, and this gives us a cost of $12.65. When activated EM liter, it costs 0.63 cents. And if we use this, it is recommended to use 4 liters of activated EM in 45.4 kilograms of cocoa.
That was Dr. Frank Intriago closing out the 4th in our Cadmium Talk series. Ladies and gentlemen, It is evident that there is a significant amount of work being done both in the field and in laboratories to develop strategies that will reduce cadmium levels in cocoa both in the pre- and post-harvest stages. We are committed to ensuring that we get that information and much more into the hands of cocoa farmers in the Latin America and Caribbean region so they can protect and preserve their livelihood. This work is made possible through project grant funding and support provided by the STDF and the 11th EDF of the European Union. From the Cadmium Talks team, I'm Althea Mackenzie.